Thank you, Stephen. Thank you to all the organizers of today's Camp Cloud Native. I'm Cheryl Hung. I'm the Director of Ecosystem at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which is the home of Kubernetes, Prometheus, Envoy, and many, many other open source projects within the Cloud Native ecosystem. So, today, I'm very, very excited to talk about an initiative which we've just launched about 2 weeks ago called the CNCF Technology Radar. And the purpose of this is to really take a look at the reality of cloud native and see how end users really adopt cloud native. And this is going to be a new quarterly feature coming back on CNCF. So I'm very, very excited today to share this with you, and I really want to hear your feedback, and I want to make this a really valuable resource for the community. So, by the way, you can tweet me at Cheryl. And effectively, my mission at the CNCF is to make sure that end users are successful and productive as they adopt cloud native. So I run and founded the Cloud Native London meetup. I've previously been a software engineer at Google, where I was building software, writing C++ and deploying it using Borg. So Borg obviously inspired Kubernetes, and that's how I've kind of moved into the infrastructure space. So I spend most of my time with end users, and in particular with the CNCF End User Community. And this is a group of about 145 companies, all different sizes, different locations, different verticals. As you can see, it's a really, really diverse group. And one of the challenges, or one of the differences with the end user community compared to what most of CNCF does is that this is a closed group, in the sense that there's a lot of discussions and calls that happen within this group and that are not recorded and not published and talked about publicly. And the reason for that is that most of these companies can't get legal or PR approval to show or to share what they're doing externally. So within this closed community, they can talk amongst themselves and ask each other, hey, we've been using this, or we're running into this challenge, or has anyone else come across, this situation? But all of that stays within the group. So one of my goals for this new initiative is to surface some of those discussions that happen internally within this group of 140 companies and make those more publicly visible, because I think there's some really, really good and interesting discussions that come out of this end user community. So what is the CNCF Technology Radar? It is this new initiative. It's supported and backed by the end user community. And the goals are to share some of the tools that are actively being used by end users and what they would recommend, and to highlight the real world usage of cloud native. And I think it's very important that we recognize that this includes proprietary non-CNCF projects. This is the truth of it, even though I work at CNCF, so obviously my goal is to promote some of the CNCF projects, but this is not how end users see the world. They see it as, here are all the options available to them. So today I'm going to describe what a technology radar is, in case you haven't come across the format before. I'm going to take you step by step through how we've thought about how to build this technology radar. And then I'm going to show you the results of the first one. So in May, last month, May 2020, we asked the end users, how do you use, or what do you use for continuous delivery? So I'm going to show you those results, and I very much welcome feedback and discussion. And the goal of this really is to spark discussion. It's not a, objective truth, but it's a reflection of reality. So now let me talk about what a technology radar is. And if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or post them to Twitter or whatever, and I'll try to follow up as we go along. Okay, what is a technology radar? So a technology radar is an opinionated guide to a set of emerging technologies, and I should have added here, at a specific point in time. So this comes from a consultancy called ThoughtWorks. They've been running it for over 10 years now, and this is their latest version. This is the one from this year. So the goal of the technology radar is to say, the things that are in the middle of this radar are things that are interesting or they consider ready to adopt or mature in some way. And as you sort of read outwards from the radar, these things become less and less widely adopted or widely known. So you can see that on the ThoughtWorks radar, this has been divided into quadrants. So it is a set of technologies, but it's not actually just technologies. This includes techniques. So techniques like applying product management to internal platforms. It includes tools. It includes languages, and it includes platforms. And the way to read this, and I'll go into platform since this is what cloud native is about. The way to read this is adopt means this is mature and stable. Trial is, we think that we've used this with some success and we think you should trial it. Assess means we've used it and we think that if you have a particular need for a particular feature or a particular use case, then these are things that you should evaluate. And then hold are things that we no longer suggest doing because we think that there might be a better way to do it. So in the platforms quadrant, you can see that ThoughtWorks says that .NET Core and Istio are ready to adopt. Anchor, Argo CD, and all of these projects fall into trial. Anthos and all of these other ones fall into assess. And then hold, there's one called node overload, which I'm not sure what node overload is. So if anybody knows what this is, I would love to hear from you, put it in the chat. So I was inspired by this format as a way to say, here's how we're seeing the set of options. Let's say if I were giving a recommendation to somebody, what were the things that I would tell them? Like, yes, you should adopt this, or yes, we used it and you should consider trying it. So I've made some changes to this format, simplified the format a little bit, and I'll show you those in just a moment. And one more thing to notice here is this has 98 points on it, and this is published once a year. So I'll show you some of those changes. But first, here are some more strict definitions for the technology radar. So adoption is mainly about, it's a clear recommendation, it's stable, it's useful across a bunch of different use cases. Trial says, we've used it with success, we think you should consider trying it as well. Assess means we think it's promising. Maybe it's too new to have a lot of information, or maybe maybe it's only applicable to certain use cases, but not to all of them. And then, as I said with hold is we recommend that you stop using it. Doesn't mean it's bad, it just means that there might be better ways to do it in the future. So this is the original ThoughtWorks radar. Now I'm going to switch to the CNCF Technology Radar and show you how I've simplified some of this. So the number one thing that I wanted to do about for this is to make sure that it's really community driven. And in particular, that 140 companies in the end user community, because this is not the opinion of a single company, because that might only show one use case. This is trying to be an opinionated guide, but across a range of companies. And of course, the 140 companies will have some bias in them. You know, the fact that they're part of CNCF means that they're adopting cloud native heavily. It probably means they're on the forefront of cloud native. So it might not be so applicable for companies that are not interested in cloud native. But the goal nonetheless is to say, here are those companies, this set of companies, and this is their collective opinion. So both the data and the themes, which I'll show you later, have been curated by community representatives. It's not the opinion of the CNCF, and it's not the opinion of, you know, one vendor or one consultancy. The second change is I wanted to focus this on future adoption. I wanted to make sure that this is really forward looking and not so much looking backwards. So I just kept the 3 rings, the assess, trial, and adopt, and not putting the hold ring on it. And then, as I mentioned before, the ThoughtWorks radar is published once a year and usually covers 100 to 150 items. But following, you know, good release management process, we want to do little and often. So we're going to do 10 to 20 items once per quarter. And these 10 to 20 items would be on a specific use case. So we could say, here is what the end user community think about security, or here's what the end user community think about serverless. And the idea is then that, number one, it's more timely, because being in cloud native, we all know that cloud native moves very, very fast, and probably once a year is just would lose a lot of the value if we could only do it once a year. And then secondly, to just simplify it, make it easier to read, have fewer things on it, and then be able to dive deeper into each one. So we removed, you know, these quadrants, for instance. So now I'm going to talk you through the methodology of the first one. And the first one that we chose was continuous delivery. Okay, so again, I want to, before I actually go into this, I want to tell you this because I think it's very important that people understand the methodology and understand how this was built in order to trust the results. Because I'm sure there are people who are going to look at the end result and say, I don't believe this, I don't trust this. So I'm going to walk this through step by step, so you can come to the same judgments or you can have your own differing opinion. Okay, so first thing that I did was to create a Google spreadsheet. It's just a normal Google spreadsheet. And I listed a bunch of continuous delivery tools and asked each company within the end user community to add a column for themselves and put down whether within their company internally what they thought about each of these projects. So do they recommend that their teams adopt them, or have they tried them, or is it at the early stage assess, or do they say it's on hold, so we don't use this project anymore? So number one, you can see that these results are not anonymized within that end user community. So every company can see what each other company is using. And again, this is fine because within this closed group, it's usually okay to share this data. And the external one is where this is anonymized. And I also asked the companies, please, if you have tools that are not listed, you should add them down on the left here. So both the options and the actual underlying data come from the end users. So I didn't give them a fixed set of solutions and said, like, you have to choose from one of these options. again, the goal is to make this really community driven. So here you can see the results color coded. So green is adopt, this bluey green for trial, the yellow for assess, and red for hold. And you can see that I've blacked out all of these company names. This actually wraps around. So this was a super wide spreadsheet. There were 33 companies here, and these 33 companies collectively submitted 177 data points. So each of these represents how one company thinks about these different projects. Okay, so once I'd collected this data, my next job was to look horizontally across these rows. So for example, GitLab, let's look at how many companies say they adopt it versus trial versus assess. So I have sorted these and put them together so that you can see it more clearly, and then sort of bucketed these by that adopt, trial, and assess. So here are the results as they were sorted. And as you can see, I've pushed all the adopts and trials and assesses together just so it's easier to read. And then the editorial opinion comes in with, where do you think these, or where did I think as the editor for this particular tech radar, where would I put these different categories? So I decided that Flux and Helm seem to have quite a few companies who have suggested that they adopt these projects. So these seem the most mature and stable. After that, I decided Circle CI, GitLab, and Kustomize had quite a few companies saying they would adopt, but maybe not as many results as these ones, or there were a couple of holds here that I thought, sort of moved it down from being able to say a clear adopt recommendation. And then lastly, if there was no consensus at all, I put it in assess. So you can see that some of these only had a handful of results, so there wasn't enough information to say one way or another. This really long one here is Jenkins, which is not surprising because everybody's heard of Jenkins, but more than 50% of the results here were hold. So I felt like this was not currently, this is my editorial opinion that I didn't want to put it into trial or adopt. What else is interesting? So Spinnaker here is again well known, and lots of people have adopted Spinnaker, but in this particular cohort, nobody said that they actively recommend adopting it. So I put this again in assess. I see there are a couple of questions in the Q&A, which for some reason I can't open. So Stephen, maybe you could help me to read the questions.
Absolutely. So the first question is, so we're getting input from the companies of the closed source groups composing CNCF and using that as a way to come up with crowdsourced tech radar, right?
Closed source companies. So these are that 140 end user companies. So they're not vendors, they're not selling or backing any of the projects, but it's a group, as in it is this fixed group of 145 companies. Yeah.
Okay, and the next one up is, don't you think it's useful information to collect post the hold statements, especially knowing which alternatives the companies went with?
Say that again. Isn't it interesting to post the hold?
Yes, to collect or post the hold statements, especially knowing which alternatives the companies went with instead.
I have mixed feelings about publishing hold. I agree that publishing hold is probably the most interesting interesting points to look at. I felt that, again, I guess there were two reasons. One is that I wanted to simplify it and just make it forward looking. But secondly, there are some political realities around putting projects and tools into hold, which I think is a bit unfair. I didn't want to put it out there and say, you know, the problem is that people will read this automatically as this project is crap, like don't use it. And I don't think that's the message that I wanted to bring across with this. Instead, it was like, here are the different tools that are available and what the end users see, but it's the recommendations I would give to somebody, for someone actively choosing something. Again, this is all editorial subjectivity, so I mean, we can certainly look at, and this is the first version as well, so you could change anything. If you really feel strongly that, you know, I really want to see what things went in hold, then we could certainly look at, you know, opening those in the future.
And last one, what was the total number of companies that responded?
33. So there were 33 columns across here. Okay, any other questions? Guys, I'll keep going and I'll show you the results, and then again, I would love to get more feedback on this, because I really do want to make this a useful resource to the community. And the last piece of this is, again, this is where the editorial judgment comes in. There are things that are maybe you would expect that were not shown by suggested by the end users, projects you might expect to be there, but, you know, in a lower position or higher position. So I'm going to accompany each radar with 3 themes. And again, remember, like, this is somewhat opinionated because it's a specific point in time with one set group. So try and be fair, but it is ultimately subjective. Again, we're going to try and publish or look at publishing this information anonymized, so that if you wanted to go and evaluate it yourself and make a suggestion or come up with a different version, you could do. Okay, hopefully all of that methodology made sense. So let's look at the actual results of what end users use for continuous delivery. So this is the much simplified from the original from the ThoughtWorks Tech Radar. Firstly, you can see it's actually only half a radar. It's only top half for readability, especially on a small screen. And then the way that, and then instead there's only 3 rings here. So adopt, trial, assess, no hold ring. And the way that I would read this radar is Flux and Helm have this broad positive consensus. Many companies are using it and they've used it successfully, and they would recommend it to others to use. Trial is Circle CI, Customize, and GitLab. So there are some companies that have been successful using these projects, but not as many as Flux or Helm. And then almost everything else went into assess. So some of these are, you know, fairly new projects. Some of them just, there wasn't enough data to say one way or another. And I know that people are going to look at this and go, hold on, why is Jenkins in assess? So I'm going to go through the themes and explain why I put Jenkins there. So what are things that I noticed about this? One is that companies didn't choose one CD tool and just stuck with it. They actually tried a lot of different options and used several of them and connected them together. So several of the larger companies have released components of their continuous delivery frameworks. You can take a look at Release Manager from Lunaway, Cube Applier from Box, and StackSet Controller from Zalando. And I also thought it was interesting that none of the public cloud managed options, CD options, so this would be like, is it AWS pipelines or is it Azure pipelines? Like those options, they were not suggested as being used by the end users, which could be just a reflection of the options that were available, or it could be that there was actually a preference to run CD in-house and not run it on a public cloud. Secondly is, I don't think of Helm as a CD tool. Helm usually positions itself as the Kubernetes package manager, but Helm was widely used and adopted as part of a CD scenario. So Helm being on the presence of CD, the presence of Helm on a CD radar was surprising to me. And then lastly, Jenkins. So Jenkins, everybody knows Jenkins. It's widely used. It's pretty mature. It's been around for a while. But I put it into assess because let me go back to the actual data, because what I saw is that more than 50% of the respondents said they had put Jenkins on hold. So this is not a judgment of like, everybody knows Jenkins, so it should go higher, or, you know, nobody uses Jenkins anymore, so put it lower. I really wanted this to be backed by the data. And my judgment on this was that this pattern that I saw here just didn't fit with those ones in trial. So for myself, I felt that I would rather put it in assess. But I know that people have already remarked to me, you know, this radar must be wrong because everybody uses Jenkins, so why is it in assess? But I really wanted to emphasize that this is what end users are actually seeing and saying. This is not what I've, you know, determined because I like or dislike Jenkins. So I hope that's clear to you. But again, like Jenkins being in assess does not mean Jenkins is bad, right? It just means that it may still be good for some use cases, but if I were looking for a new CD solution today, or if I were suggesting that you should look for a new CD solution, I would say you should assess Jenkins, but you should also be assessing other tools that are more cloud native. They support the sort of GitOps workflow and a more cloud native mindset. Flux was one of those. So Flux, again, ended up in here in the adopt phase. I see another question. Again, Stephen, please help me out by reading this.
I have you covered. So the question is a longer one. So some companies might put a tool on hold just because it does not fit the current need, but it might still be the perfect tool for other use cases. That is fine if the tech radar is just used to get a statistical view on the common use cases. Example, Helm for CD is just a consequence of adopting Kubernetes. Jenkins move to hold might be a reason that those companies are moving to Kubernetes. Perhaps a segmented view of the radar might make sense, don't you think?
What do you mean by segmented? Let me just come back to the visual layout. So what do you mean by segmented?
So I'm reading in between the lines and thinking maybe from the context of people who maybe aren't using Kubernetes or other cloud native technologies.
So as in for companies who are not using Kubernetes, should they be looking at this?
So segmented as for Kubernetes adopting companies might have a totally different tech radar than those not using it. That was the follow-up response.
Got it. Yes. Yeah, this makes sense. Yeah. So this is very much in the mindset of these are the companies who are actively adopting cloud native and almost certainly Kubernetes with it. So this only applies within the context of cloud native, and I wouldn't use this to say, you know, Jenkins. If you're not using cloud native or not using Kubernetes, this is not a reflection upon Jenkins, or this data does not apply, I would say. Does that make sense?
Okay, and one more. I assume it means you use Helm with drone?
Not necessarily. So I don't. So actually, one of the things that I didn't mention earlier is that when I asked each company to put in their results here, and I asked them also to add a comment if they wanted to about why they put it in there. So I don't think any of the companies mentioned using Helm with drone. Drone is on here, but if I remember correctly, there were very few responses to drone. Yeah. So I don't think we can say sort of one way or another. And in fact, like, yeah, Helm, there were a few that said they put it on hold, but yeah. I can't say about like drones specifically.
And there's one more, it seems a more general question. What about other tools in the landscape?
So other tools within CD or other tools just like everything on the landscape? I can talk about both. So other tools within CD, as I said, when I asked that end user community to put in their information, I also asked them to add any options that they were using but weren't already listed. So I want to emphasize that these options are here because this is what end users really see and what they've suggested. So I wouldn't add in extra options just because they're on the landscape. I mean, the landscape is not all encompassing anyway, of course. So there's no, we're not forcing, you know, if it wasn't suggested by end users, we wouldn't force it to be added to the tech radar. And then the other question on, well, possibly the other way you meant the question is, what about all the other things on the landscape? So the idea is that this would be done once a quarter on a different use case. So one use case might be on security, one use case might be on serverless. You know, one could be within a specific vertical, like what do financial services companies use? The nice thing about this format is it's very, very flexible. So we could even say things like, if you use storage, then what kind of storage do you use? Do you use object store? Do you use file store? Do you use databases, something else? And lay it out similarly in this format to say, you know, here are things lots of people are adopting and have positive experiences of, and then less and less as you go further out. So we'll definitely try and cover over the next quarters and years different aspects within cloud native. That's definitely the goal. I love this feedback, by the way. This is fantastic, and my goal is to make sure this is really a useful and valuable resource to the community that sparks some discussion and people find interesting. So I'm very, very happy to keep taking questions.
So I have a question, actually. So is there an intent to maybe do an aggregation of some of this information over time? Like what does the year in review technology radar look like?
We could certainly do that. Like the concept of this is it is tied to a specific point in time. So even if we did, this was in May, and maybe it will certainly have shifted if we did the same exercise in December. But we could certainly say, like, from the tech radars we've seen in, 2020 or 2021, here's everything, an overall view. Yeah, that would be pretty easy to do.
Okay, we've got another one from Q&A. That's what it's a response to one of the initial ones. That's what I meant when I mentioned Helm and Drone or Argo CD with Customize. Those tools are not mutually exclusive, but supplemental and somewhat case specific.
I think, so I only went on the data that I actually saw here. So I did not look at, what was it, Argo CD and Customize being put together. I mean, there were some like Jenkins and Jenkins X and Jenkins Blue Ocean that also you would probably adopt within a similar situation or together. So if you were interested in this information, we're going to try and release the anonymized version of this probably onto GitHub. So you could do your own assessment that way if you wanted. Any more for any more? Okay, cool. In that case, I've only got a handful more slides, and then I would, again, very much love to hear more feedback. Like, what could we do to make this more useful for you? What do you think that this is a fair way to do it? Like, this is the very first version of this, so we can sort of change everything about it. The goal is to just really make this useful and valuable and reflective of reality. Okay. So other things within CNCF, if you want to read more, Helm, Argo, Flux are all CNCF projects. We also write case studies. So if you want to read in a bit more detail about specific companies, Babylon and Intuit are both companies within the end user community, and we've helped publish a case study on how they do CD, excuse me. So you can read those for more detail. All right, what is coming next? So I keep reiterating this. I really want to make this useful and valuable. I've already got a huge spreadsheet with about 40 items of information on about, people are saying, yes, we want to see more of this on the tech radar. We want to see it interactive. We want to see we want to see it linked to the CNCF landscape. We want to see questions like, how can we get our viewpoints reflected on the radar as well? And so all of this, I think, is really, really indicative of the interest in this, and that's why I'm going to keep pushing on it. So if you have feedback that you want to leave after this, this link redirects to a GitHub issue, which is just a discussion thread. You can put your thoughts down on there, or if you want to send an email privately, you can email info@cncf.io, and I will pick up the feedback from that. So next version coming out will be in September. So we're going to do this on a quarterly basis, and with the aspiration eventually to get this on a monthly basis. So we could even do 12 a year on lots of different use cases. But for now, we're going to go quarterly. So September will be the next one. And if you're interested in hearing about a specific cloud native use case, then you can again go to that same link, which will link you to the GitHub issue, and you can start putting down and voting for what you want. So some people have asked about observability, security, I think has come up as well. So again, put your thoughts there. The goal of this is that the next technology radars and all future upcoming ones will be run by the end user community. So the end user community, there'll be an editorial panel who will pick which topic, which use case it will be on. The end user, the whole end user community will contribute their data, and then the editorial panel will choose the final position of the points and write the themes that they see reflected from those. So I've done this for the first one as the editor, but from the future, content will be entirely driven from the end user community. Lastly, if you're an end user of Cloud Native as well, again, we really, really want to get your viewpoint represented on this. So you can go to this link and check out the other companies that are in the end user community. All of that data was not anonymized, that original Google spreadsheet, so you can find out exactly who uses what, you can read their comments, you can get in touch with them. It's a much more sort of closed, within this group, everything is open. So there's a lot of trust within the community, and you can come and join that end user community as well. You can contribute, so have your viewpoints, have what you're using reflected on a future radar. And then the last point, as I said, is each quarter, we're going to pick 5 companies at random, get them to form an editorial team, and then they will drive what the actual results look like. So if you wanted to be actually determining what the technology radar looks like, again, please come and join our end user community. And this actually ties into a much deeper fundamental part of this initiative, which is that one of the criticisms of CNCF is that it's vendor driven, right? Like there's all these big companies who are getting together to talk amongst themselves and just, you know, live in this bubble. And another one of my goals with this tech radar is to use the actual real world experience to drive CNCF technical strategy. So the TOC, the Technical Oversight Committee, are extremely excited by this because they can actually see what the reality looks like. Same with the SIGs. They're saying, you know, we have all these projects coming in, but we don't really know how to prioritize them. So if we can see what end users really care about and what they're missing, then we can start prioritizing what things come into the CNCF, and we can put out calls and say, hey, end users are missing projects that do this and that. So we're looking for an open source project which does this to join CNCF. So in a much deeper way, this connects with everything that the CNCF does to support these open source projects and to decide the direction of Cloud Native. Here's my email address if you need to contact me. Again, private feedback, thoughts, come and join our end user community. You can just reach out to me at any time. And that is it. This is the link to the slides. And once again, I see a few more Q&A. So Stephen, back to you.
Coming in, hold on.
It's perfect timing. We've got about 5 minutes left, so
Yeah.
that's right.
All right. So one is thank you ever so much. I share that sentiment. So the next one is another thank you from Richard. Hey Cheryl, hope you're okay. Not seen you since February. I presented at the Cloud Native London meetup back in March. Completely love this idea. I think it's a great start and helps those wanting to get more into the open source and Cloud Native a really very easy definition of what's what. Great job.
Oh, awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. It's been a labor of love for the last few months to get this out. So very, very happy to hear that. And nice to see you again as well.